Hello from Learn Channel Studio and welcome to our new broadcast. This episode is dedicated to the topic of leveraging the compliance function in organizations. We will discuss about this topic with our newest guest, the expert trainer in the field of compliance, Michael Richardson. As a former risk and compliance consultant with Big Four accounting firm and as a licensed auditor, Michael has been supporting clients from all over the world for many years now. He is currently a lecturer at McGill University in Montreal, Canada, teaching modules in corporate governance and compliance for the graduate CPA program and delivering compliance courses for L3RN PDI. He has been a guest lecturer at the University of Toronto and at Universidad de la Istmo in Latin America. The views and opinions are on his own. Welcome to our show, Michael.
Thank you for having me, Dana. Great to be here.
Michael, how has the compliance function changed over time?
Well, I would say that the biggest change that we've been seeing over the past, 10 years or so, is that compliance has started to become a strategic partner in the business rather than adopting a risk or a legal lens. For example, in the past, we've seen the compliance function report to the general counsel of the organization or even to the chief risk officer. But what we've been seeing in the past 10 years or so is that the compliance function has actually started reporting directly to the chief executive or even directly to the board of directors. And having that direct reporting line to those charged with governance, like the board, for example, makes it such that compliance becomes a strategic pillar to help grow the business rather than just helping the business follow all the rules.
Do you think that this is crucial for business success?
I think that a business cannot function without compliance. And I think it's especially true if we look at the current environment that we live in. Whether we're talking about a global pandemic, whether we're talking about accelerating regulatory infrastructures around the world, we need to have a compliance function that is able to adapt quickly and that is able to provide organizations, subsidiaries, the entire value chain actually, with the proper structure that we can follow the rules, but actually leverage the compliance function as a strategic partner for growth.
With that in mind, do you think that the most of the organizations are implementing solid compliance policies?
I would say that companies are seeing the benefit of implementing compliance and compliance policies, but they are still faced with resource challenges. What I'm seeing in the real world is that in the past, growing the compliance function used to be dedicated around growing resources from a headcount perspective, growing the number of compliance officers that we have working in the compliance function. Now, we're actually changing that and we're seeing stronger technology being invested in, real-time metrics tracking, transparent KPIs across the entire business, and we're seeing compliance right there at the center. But that doesn't mean we're spending less money on compliance just because we're moving more to technology for compliance growth rather than headcount for compliance growth. We've actually been spending more. I've seen over 2/3 of companies actually have a net increase in the investment around compliance in the last 5 years, which I think is great to see. The reality remains that things are changing very quickly. And I think investing in compliance technology alone is probably not enough. We need to be continuously investing in the training of our compliance function so that we can stay up to date with our obligations from a regulatory perspective, of course, updating our internal compliance policies and procedures, but also leveraging that strategic pillar that we were speaking about earlier.
What external factors have the biggest influence on organizational compliance?
That's a great question. I get the same question quite often. I would point to 3 major items. The first, I would say, the availability of external data to benchmark against to guide our own internal policy development. For example, when we start to set internal compliance targets, we often hear terms of, well, we want to be best in class. We want to have industry-leading compliance internally to the organization. Well, what does best in class really mean? What is industry-leading compliance? What does that mean for your business? And getting that data, getting those external benchmarks, that's challenge number one. Challenge number two, I see, of course, a constantly changing regulatory environment. And there's no way to hide from that. Laws are changing every single day, whether you are in the Middle East, whether you're in Europe, Asia, North or South America, no matter where you are in the world, laws change every day, and the compliance function is struggling to keep up. And the third thing that I would point to is competition to actually recruit talent that has the necessary expertise around compliance. Compliance is quite a technical field. We can't have people that might not necessarily have the right experience to come in as a compliance officer. And the reality is we're competing against the other players in our industry for that compliance talent. And we have to have a strong value offering as an employer to be able to recruit top talent.
Do you think that compliance departments within companies are ready to face unpredicted and sudden catastrophes?
I would say that you can't ever be fully prepared to deal with major catastrophes. And I think we saw exactly that happen with the COVID-19 pandemic. But I have seen that companies with stronger compliance functions actually recover a lot quicker than those without. And that goes back to that compliance as a strategic pillar in the business that we spoke about earlier. I think that having a strong compliance function has led to the development of strong business recovery plans and business continuity plans. Following those plans rigorously allowed companies to pivot quickly in light of a major catastrophe. For example, at the beginning of the pandemic, we've seen major airlines pivot from being a commercial passenger airline for travel to cargo, shipments of cargo. That wasn't necessarily part of their business model or not as extensive as it was prior to implementing that policy. Or better yet, we have grocery chains like Whole Foods in North America, for example, that have actually decided to shut down some of their stores to customers and instead pivot those stores to strictly being distribution centers to help ship food from that location directly to customers' doors. And you can bet that compliance was part of that conversation. And that's what we mean by being a strategic partner and not just someone that helps companies follow the rules. Companies wouldn't be able to pivot their business model overnight if it were not for the strong support of the compliance function. And I'm happy to see that. And I think we're going to continue to see that as time goes on.
Michael, what was the impact that COVID-19 had on corporate governance?
There's no question that COVID-19 hit hard. And of course, my thoughts go out to everybody who has been affected by the pandemic. It hit businesses hard around the world. I speak to senior leaders, VP, all the way to CFO and the chief executive officer every day. And I cannot point to one company that has not had their governance function impacted in some way by COVID-19. It refocused what corporate governance is supposed to be. And many boards realize that, hey, maybe we're not as prepared as we thought we could have been. And when you see stock markets like the Dow Jones falling 35% in a couple of weeks, people reacted quickly and people reacted adversely, of course, as is only natural for people to do. But as we see corporate governance adapting the way things work, we look at a stock market like the Dow Jones that went from 19,000 points in March, April 2020 to now being 33,000 or more today. And it goes to show you that the corporate governance and the compliance function are versatile, they are flexible, but we have to set the groundwork and the compliance function needs to be part of that conversation.
Can we say that technology is changing and improving and compliance follows?
Great question. I definitely think that the technology tools that we're able to use today as compliance professionals are helping to improve compliance. I think there's no question about that. I don't know if I would agree that the compliance function follows. An organization can't expect to invest in these technology tools and suddenly hope to have a stronger compliance function overnight, or that compliance itself can be achieved. And I don't think that would be unreasonable. I like to look at it as driving a car. If you are driving your car and you never change your oil, if you never repair your brakes, and if you're driving at 120 kilometers per hour in third gear, you can't show up to your mechanic and say, hey, how come my car doesn't work? And I think the same could be said about compliance. If we're not consistently investing in keeping the compliance function up to date, we can't just expect to go to our technology mechanic and hope for things to be great overnight. It's a consistent challenge, and it's daily work to help get the compliance function to where it needs to be. And I think that leads to the fundamentals of a compliance culture. And we see why that's important, especially in recent times.
How can we define the term compliance culture, and what steps should organizations undertake to reach this kind of culture?
Yeah, great question. I would say, look, in every course that I lead, in every meeting that I have with senior executives, I always say compliance is a culture, not a department. And what I mean by that is that compliance is everyone's responsibility. And let's be honest, just because you are sitting in the compliance function or you have a compliance officer hat on, that doesn't mean that the compliance responsibility stopped with you. We see clients where every new employee has to go through the compliance policies and procedures, the code of conduct, anti-bribery and corruption policy, code of ethics, for example. Compliance is everyone's responsibility. And the stronger businesses that I've seen that have the best compliance policies are not just those that have "we love compliance" on the wall on a poster. We're actually seeing compliance behaviors being demonstrated by everybody in the organization, from the people at the bottom of the corporate hierarchy all the way to the CEO. Because the reality is, it starts with the tone at the top and it ends with everybody throughout the chain. And I think developing that mindset, that compliance is a culture and not a department, is step number one. We can talk about external benchmarks. We can talk about technology tools. We can talk about COVID. We can talk about governance. If we don't have the compliance culture, I think all of it is not even relevant.
What would you say that implementing a solid compliance culture is more important now than ever?
I wouldn't say that implementing a compliance culture is more important now than ever before. I think it's always been important, but I do think that it's getting the attention it deserves a lot more today than it has in the past. Companies are seeing the cost of non-compliance. And yes, there are costs associated with having a compliance function. But as a US official in the past had said, if you think compliance is expensive, try non-compliance. And we're seeing enforcement actions from regulators with penalties, with fines, risk of operational delays, risk of criminal prosecution for executives, for example, that might be lacking of compliance. So we can point to any number of corporations that we've seen in the news, for example. I like to pass the Wall Street Journal test. If what I'm doing would embarrass me if I were on the front page of the newspaper, well, don't do that thing, right? From a compliance function. And I think that's fair for every organization. If what I'm doing will make me proud as a professional and proud as a company, that's great. Promote that. But if it's not going to make me proud, if I'm going to be kind of ashamed of what I'm doing as a business, well, the compliance function is there to guide those decisions and to make sure that the business is able to always be at the forefront of compliance, at the forefront of respect, and acting with the utmost of integrity.
How will compliance prepare organizations to get back on track and maintain stability?
Well, we're seeing a lot of that right now with business continuity plans and business recovery plans. What I've seen as well is that the compliance function has been one of the key players in the room at the board level to actually implement things like stress tests, for example. One of the things that we saw when the pandemic started, for instance, or any other major catastrophe, is that the first stress is on capital. Are we going to have enough cash flow to pay our workers? Are we going to have enough cash flow to pay our suppliers? Are we going to have enough cash flow to continue running the business at all? And I think having stress tests and having compliance involved in that conversation, and not just in the compliance department, but at the board level, to have that level of governance and oversight required, I think that would be the first step that I would do.
How can professionals make sure they are up to date with all the compliance trends and requirements?
Well, look, compliance changes every day. And I don't think there's any denying of that. I think if a company wants to stay up to date with compliance trends, if they're asking how to do that, I think they have to ask themselves how much they are willing to actually invest in what is required to stay up to date. And we saw before, if you think compliance is expensive, try non-compliance. We have things like building strong compliance policies and procedures. That takes time, that takes people, that takes effort. We have things like participating in industry conferences around compliance. That takes time, takes people, takes effort. Training and upskilling employees, same thing applies. Compliance changes every single day. Every morning I get newsletters of major compliance headlines or major regulatory shifts happening around the world. And I have to stay up to date as a professional on my own rights. And the same thing applies to every professional that works in compliance. Just because we've taken a compliance course in the past in school, for example, might not necessarily mean we are as equipped to deal with the changing realities of the compliance function over time. And I think consistently investing in training is going to be part of that conversation as well.
Michael, what kind of solutions does L3RN offer in this regard?
There are several courses that L3RN offers. I personally teach the CCP course, the Certified Compliance Professional course, and I love it. It's a great course. We have a lot of fun, and we make it real, and we make it interactive, and we base it on the real world. But there are also other courses that L3RN offers. So we have the Governance, Risk, and Compliance course, GRC. We have internal audit. We have systems audits, a masterclass in fraud investigations, market and liquidity risk courses. There are tons of courses, I think over 80 at this point, that people can choose from to help build a compliance function and develop that compliance culture. But equally importantly, maintain our compliance knowledge over time. That's the challenge, because what I'm seeing in the real world when I work with clients is that we see that we have a strong compliance start, but we haven't necessarily updated or refreshed our compliance understanding over time. And I think that becomes the key. So in my opinion, it's important to consistently stay up to date, not because I just teach the course, but I myself follow my own trainings every year to be sure that I am up to date and I can lead by example.
Michael, thank you for the show and for the great insights you shared with us.
Thank you for having me, Dilena. Great to see you. Hope everyone's keeping safe. Have a great day.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for staying with us. You can tune in for viewing more live stream on LinkedIn, or you can watch recorded sessions on our YouTube and Vimeo channel. Keep learning and let us know if there is any topic you would like to cover. Until next time, stay tuned.